Tesha Williams fixed her hair in front of the bathroom mirror and took a critical look at her reflection. 36 years old and looking 30, as she liked to tell her subscribers. Tonight's broadcast was going to be special. She planned to talk about the importance of maintaining romance in a marriage after 10 years together. The irony was that for the past few weeks, Rick had been acting like romance was the last thing on his mind. She went down to the kitchen, where the breakfast table was already set. Fresh croissants, fruit, coffee, everything like in a magazine about beautiful life. It was the kind of content that her subscribers loved. 200,000 people followed the life of the Williams family, considering them a model of harmony and well-being. Tesha carefully maintained this image, posting photos of happy moments, shooting videos about family traditions, sharing recipes and household tips. Rick showed up in the kitchen at 7:30 in the morning, as usual. Gray suit, white shirt, navy blue tie. He looked personable, tall, broad-shouldered, with a neat beard and attentive brown eyes. Women in comments under Tesha's posts often wrote that she was lucky to have a husband. She used to be proud of those comments. Now, they seemed like mockery. "Good morning, darling," she said, rising on tiptoe for a kiss. Rick kissed her cheek absent-mindedly, already leafing through something on his phone. He used to always kiss her on the lips in the morning. Tesha had noticed the change 3 weeks ago, but tried to convince herself that she was just placing too much importance on the little things. "Coffee's ready," she added, pouring the flavored liquid into cups. "I'm on at 6 o'clock tonight. Can you make it in time for dinner?" "We'll see," Rick replied, not looking up from the screen. "A lot of work. New security project for the bank. I might be late." He'd been running late a lot lately. Rick used to try to get home early, especially on Tesha's broadcast days. He used to say he was proud of her success on social media, that she was talented at blogging. Now, however, it seemed like he didn't care. Tesha sat across from him and started eating a croissant, watching her husband. He was typing something on his phone, and she noticed a slight smile on his face. It was the kind of smile she hadn't seen in a long time when he was communicating with her. "Who are you texting?" she asked as nonchalantly as possible. "Work stuff," Rick answered briefly, tucking his phone into his pocket. He got up from his desk, grabbed his briefcase, and headed for the exit. Usually they chatted for 15 or 20 minutes in the morning, planning the weekend, discussing current affairs. Today, their entire conversation fit into 2 minutes. "Have a good day," Tesha shouted back at him. "Goodbye," came from the hallway, and the front door slammed. Tesha was alone in the kitchen. She cleared the table, loaded the dishwasher, and went up to the bedroom to get ready for the shoot. She had to think of something to talk about on the air. The topic of romance in marriage now seemed out of place. Better to talk about something neutral, new recipes or plans for the fall. In the meantime, Rick made his way to the office through the familiar streets of Riverside. The city was waking up slowly. School buses were taking kids to class. Coffee shops had lines of office workers lined up. Gardeners were watering front lawns. It was an ordinary morning of an ordinary day, but Rick was feeling especially good. The reason for his high spirits was Kira Jackson. The 24-year-old programmer had joined their company 3 months ago, and Rick had taken notice of her right away. Not just because she was beautiful, slender, with long curly hair and intelligent dark eyes. Kira was smart, ambitious, and made no secret of her admiration for Rick's cybersecurity expertise. At first, he'd just helped her with workflows, explaining the intricacies of projects, giving her advice. Then he started staying late at the office when he knew Kira was working late. The conversations became more and more personal. Kira talked about her plans for the future, how she wanted to become a leading information security specialist. Rick shared his professional experience and gradually his personal experiences. A month ago, they went out for coffee after work for the first time. 2 weeks ago, Rick kissed her in the parking lot outside the office. And last week, they spent the evening at her apartment, and everything changed for good. Rick parked outside the 20-story building that housed their IT company's office. He met a few colleagues in the elevator, said hello, and exchanged a few phrases about upcoming projects. On the 18th floor, he made his way to his workplace, a spacious office with panoramic windows. As a senior security consultant, he was entitled to a separate office, unlike the junior specialists who sat in the open space. Kira worked right there, and through the glass partitions, Rick could watch her. She was already in place, studying the code on the monitor intently. Her hair was gathered into a ponytail, and she was wearing a white blouse and dark blue pants. The business-like style suited her well. Rick turned on his computer, but instead of getting to work, he pulled out his phone and texted Kira, "Good morning, beautiful. How's it going?" The reply came almost instantly. "I'm figuring out a new encryption algorithm. Maybe you could help?" "Sure. Come by the office at 10. We'll discuss it." Rick put the phone away and began to analyze the security reports. The work required concentration. He was checking the defense systems of a large bank, identifying vulnerabilities, developing recommendations for their elimination. But his thoughts kept coming back to Kira. Yesterday, she had hinted that she would like to spend the weekend with him. Rick had already thought of a plan. He would tell Tesha that he was going to a corporate training in a neighboring state. He and Kira could go to the mountains, spend some time alone. At 10 in the morning, there was a knock on the door. Kira walked in with her laptop in hand, smiled, and closed the door behind her. "Hi," she said quietly. "Really need help with the algorithm." They leaned over the screen, discussing technical details. Kira asked intelligent questions, quickly grasping the explanations. Rick caught himself admiring not only her looks, but also her sharp mind. With Tesha, he couldn't talk about work for a long time. She didn't understand technical issues and was frankly bored when he tried to tell something interesting from the professional sphere. "Do you understand now?" he asked, when they had parsed a complicated piece of code. "Yes, thank you. You're a great teacher." Kira touched his hand. "Maybe we can meet again after work today?" "Sure, I know a place." At that moment, their mutual colleague, James River, the head of the development department, entered the office without knocking. Kira quickly moved away from Rick, pretending she was just consulting on a work-related matter. "Rick, we need to discuss the specs for the new project," James said. "Do you have a minute?" "Sure. Kira, are we done?" "Yeah, we're clear. Thanks for your help." She left, and Rick turned his attention back to discussing work matters with James. But part of his attention was still occupied with thoughts of his evening with Kira. Meanwhile, on the other side of town, Detective Valerie Hayes was drinking coffee from a paper cup and studying an armed robbery case file. A tall, trim woman with short dark hair and tired eyes, she had worked in the Major Crimes Unit for 15 years. At 42, Valerie was one of the most experienced detectives in Riverside. Her desk at the police station was piled high with case folders, crime scene photos, and expert reports. Today, she had to finish the investigation of the jewelry store robbery. The criminals had already been apprehended. The only thing left to do was to file the paperwork for the prosecutor's office. "Hayes, we've got a fight in a bar on Oak Street," said the duty sergeant. "One's in the hospital, the other's in custody. Can you make the trip?" Valerie sighed and set aside her report folder. Bar fights were routine. Usually it came down to two drunks having a disagreement over something minor and deciding to settle it with their fists. Sometimes it would come down to knives or bottles, and then it would get more serious. "Is Derek with me?" she asked, referring to her partner, Detective Derek Clark. "He's in court on the Thompson case. Will you go alone?" "No problem." Valerie finished her coffee, grabbed her jacket, and headed for the squad car. It was sunny but cool outside, typical California fall weather. The bar was in a working-class neighborhood where such incidents were common. Valerie knew the place. She'd been there several times before on calls. Patrol officers had already cordoned off the scene. One of the participants in the fight was lying on the floor in a pool of blood. The other was sitting on a chair in handcuffs. The owner of the bar, a heavy-set man in his 50s, was smoking nervously near the entrance. "What happened?" Valerie asked the senior patrolman. Two locals had been drinking since morning, arguing over the soccer team. One hit the other over the head with a bottle. The victim's in hospital, stable but serious. Assailant's drunk off his ass. Valerie examined the scene, interviewed witnesses, wrote up a report. The usual story: alcohol, stupid argument, uncontrolled aggression. An hour later, she returned to the station to continue the paperwork. The day went by with routine work. Valerie closed a robbery case, began investigating a bar fight, answered calls from co-workers and prosecutors. At 6 p.m., she was getting ready to go home when the phone rang. This is Detective Hayes. "Valerie, there's a strange story here," said the voice of the duty sergeant. "The call came in half an hour ago. Neighbors are complaining about noise from an apartment on Maple Avenue. Uniforms are here, but the landlady won't open the door. She says she's fine, but she's screaming hysterically." "So? Maybe a domestic dispute?" "Could be. But neighbors say they heard something about streaming and live streaming. The woman's supposed to be some kind of blogger. Maybe we should check it out." Valerie looked at her watch. The workday was over, but experience told her it was better to be safe. Family arguments sometimes ended tragically. "Okay, I'm on my way. What's the address?" 412 Maple Avenue, apartment 10. Patrolman Smith and Rodriguez are already there. Valerie grabbed her car keys and went back to the call. She had no idea that this day would change her perception of how far people could go for a moment of social media fame. Tesha Williams was preoccupied with an entirely different problem at that moment. She was sitting in her bedroom in front of her dressing table mirror, trying to cover up the red spots on her face with foundation. In the morning, when Rick left for work, she decided to check his things. The pocket of the jacket he had worn yesterday revealed a restaurant receipt for two, an expensive restaurant they hadn't visited in 2 months. And yesterday, Rick had said he'd worked late and had dinner right in the office. Tesha took a picture of the check and put it back away. Then she reached into the desk drawer where Rick usually kept important papers. Among the bank statements and work papers, she found several other receipts: coffee at a coffee shop near his office, purchases at a flower store, a gas bill from a gas station in a part of town where they had no business. It was all adding up to an unpleasant picture. Rick was clearly spending time with someone else, and judging by the flowers and expensive restaurants, it wasn't just business. Tesha pulled out her phone and checked Rick's social media accounts. He wasn't an active user, sometimes liking friends' posts, occasionally reposting articles about cybersecurity. But in recent weeks, she'd noticed that he'd been checking Instagram and TikTok more often. He used to say those apps were a waste of time. She tried to remember if he'd talked about new coworkers, especially women. Rick sometimes mentioned work stuff, but he rarely mentioned coworkers' names. But Tesha only knew a few of his longtime coworkers, the ones they'd met at company events. The last such event had been 3 months ago. Rick had introduced her to a couple of new employees then, but Tesha didn't remember their names well. She only remembered that among them was a young black woman, very pretty, with long hair and intelligent eyes. She worked as a programmer and looked about 25 years old at most. Tesha tried to remember what the woman's name was. Was it Kira, I think? Or was it Kara? Something with a K. And she clearly admired Rick. She listened to his stories about his work with such attention, as if he were the most interesting person in the world. Tesha hadn't given it much thought at the time. Rick was an expert in his field, and young employees could indeed learn from him. But now that memory was taking on a different coloring. Tesha picked up the phone and dialed Rick's office number. The receptionist answered. "Good afternoon, this is Tesha Williams, Rick's wife. He left some important documents at home. Could you tell him I'll be there in half an hour?" "Sure, Mrs. Williams. I will." Tesha dressed quickly and went to the office. She wanted to see for herself how Rick behaved at work, especially with younger co-workers. Maybe she was just getting herself worked up, and all those checks and weirdness had a simple explanation. But when she got to the 18th floor and saw Rick talking to that very beautiful programmer very close, almost touching each other, all doubts vanished. The expression on their faces, their body language, the way they looked at each other, it was all too eloquent. Tesha turned around and left without ever meeting her husband. All the way home, she thought about what to do with this knowledge. Make a scandal, demand an explanation, or gather more evidence? And then another idea occurred to her. She has a platform, 200,000 subscribers who follow her life. All this time she's been showing them the perfect family, the model marriage. Maybe it's time to show them the truth. Tesha spent the next 3 days in what she herself called detective mode. She studied her husband's habits with the methodicalness of an investigator, remembered the smallest details of his behavior, fixed all the inconsistencies in his stories about work. Rick left at the usual time in the morning, but returned later and later. Yesterday, he had come home at 10:30 in the evening, citing a server emergency with a client. Tesha checked the news. There was no mention of banking problems. But while Rick showered, she took a quick look at his browser history on his work laptop. Among the technical sites and professional forums were searches for restaurants and entertainment in the city. And he wasn't just looking for good places, but specifically romantic restaurants and cozy coffee shops. She snapped a picture of the screen with her phone and closed the laptop. The evidence was piling up, but she needed the full picture. Tesha decided to follow Rick after work. She parked outside the office building at 6:30 on Wednesday evening. The workday at the IT company ended at 6, but many employees stayed late. Tesha waited almost an hour when she finally saw the familiar figure of her husband. Rick didn't leave the building alone. The young programmer from the corporate event was walking beside him. They went to Rick's car, talking animatedly about something. The girl laughed, touching his arm when she wanted to emphasize a point. Rick opened the passenger seat door for her, a gesture he hadn't done for Tesha in months. Tesha cautiously followed, keeping her distance. They headed downtown toward the waterfront, where the most expensive restaurants in Riverside were located. Rick parked near Sapphire's, the very establishment Tesha had found the receipt from in his pocket. She waited until they disappeared inside, then stepped closer. Tables could be seen through the restaurant's large windows. Rick and his companion sat at the window, leaning across the table toward each other. The waiter brought them wine, and they clinked glasses. The scene looked like a classic romantic date. Tesha stood at the window for about 10 minutes, watching them. Rick looked happy, the way she hadn't seen him at home in a long time. He was smiling, gesticulating, telling the girl something. She listened with an admiration that was impossible not to notice. When Rick began to look around, Tesha hurried away from the window and returned to the car. She had seen enough. Now she knew exactly who her husband was cheating on her with. At home, Tesha sat down at her computer and began searching for information about the employees of the IT company where Rick worked. The corporate website had a team page with photos and short biographies. Tesha quickly found a familiar face, Kira Jackson, a junior information security major and graduate of California Technological University. Her social media profile was open. Kira regularly posted photos, work moments, meeting friends, traveling. Tesha scrolled through her feed over the past month and found a few posts that made her heart race. A photo of a beautiful bouquet with the caption, "Someone knows how to make pleasant surprises." Selfies at an expensive restaurant with the caption, "The evening was a success." A blurry photo of a man's hands holding a glass of wine with the caption, "Sometimes life gives unexpected gifts." Tesha scrutinized every detail. The bouquet was white roses, the kind of flowers she liked, and Rick knew it. The restaurant in the photo was definitely the Sapphire. She recognized the characteristic wall finishes. And the man's hands in the last photo wore a watch very similar to the one she'd given Rick for their wedding anniversary. Tesha leaned back in her chair and tried to calm down. The facts spoke for themselves. Rick was having an affair with a young coworker, beautiful, smart, successful, who looked at him like he was a movie character. What do I do with that knowledge? Make a scene with my husband? Demand an explanation? File for divorce? All of these options seemed too mundane, too predictable. And then Tesha came up with an idea that at first seemed crazy to her. She has a platform, An audience that follows her every move. 200,000 people see the Williams family as a model of happiness and harmony. What if we show them the truth? What if we expose her husband publicly, in front of all her followers? The idea was daring, risky, but the more Tesha thought about it, the more appealing it seemed. Rick had always prided himself on his reputation, his image as a successful professional. A public scandal would hit him harder than any domestic strife. Tesha began to plan. On Friday night, she had a regular airing scheduled. Usually, she told subscribers about her weekend plans, shared recipes for family dinners, and answered questions from the comments. This time, the broadcast would be special. She checked Rick's schedule. On Friday, he promised to be home by 7 p.m. They had a reunion planned with old friends. The perfect time to air would be at 7:30. Rick would be back just in the middle of the broadcast. Tesha spent Thursday preparing. She printed out all the evidence she could find: receipts, screenshots of Kira's posts, photos from the date at the restaurant. Folded it all into a folder and hid it under a pillow on the living room couch where she usually broadcast. Friday morning, Rick left for work in his usual good spirits. He even kissed Tesha on the cheek and said he was looking forward to seeing his friends in the evening. "I'll see you at 7, honey," he said, taking the car keys. "See you then," Tesha replied with a smile that didn't waver until the door closed behind him. The day stretched agonizingly slow. Tesha tried to do the usual things: cleaning the house, cooking, replying to comments on social networks. But her thoughts kept coming back to the upcoming broadcast. She rehearsed the phrases she would say, imagined Rick's reaction when he saw himself on the live broadcast. At 6:30, Tesha began to get ready. She did her makeup, styled her hair, chose a beautiful blouse, everything as usual. Her subscribers shouldn't have suspected anything unusual until the very last moment. At 7:25, she turned on the camera and began the broadcast. The viewers connected quickly. In a few minutes, there were about 1,000 people online. "Hello, darlings." Tesha smiled into the camera with her usual cordiality. "How are you doing? How was your week?" The comments were sprinkled with cheers, hearts, and questions about the weekend's plans. Tesha answered some of them, keeping the conversation casual. On the surface, it was business as usual. "Today I want to talk to you about honesty in relationships," she began, and the tone of her voice became a little more serious. About the importance of being honest with each other. The number of viewers continued to grow. Already 3,500 people were watching. "You know, sometimes we think we know someone we care about, and then it turns out that they're living a completely different life," Tesha continued. "That all these years he's been deceiving us." Question marks appeared in the comments, someone asking if everything was okay. Tesha ignored them. That's when she heard the sound of keys in the front door lock. Rick had arrived right on schedule. "My dears, today you will witness a very important conversation," Tesha said into the cell. "My husband joined us." Rick appeared in the doorway of the living room with a puzzled look on his face. "Tesh, what's going on? Are you on the air?" "I am, and I'm just about to tell our viewers something interesting about you." Tesha pulled out her evidence folder and showed the first check to the camera. "You see this check? Dinner at Sapphire for 2. Except my husband wasn't at that restaurant with me." The look on Rick's face changed. He realized he was walking into a trap. "Tesha, can we talk about this off camera?" "No, honey. Since you're so fond of hiding the truth, let's talk about it in public." Tesha showed the following photo. "And this is your colleague, Kira Jackson. She's a very pretty girl, isn't she?" The number of viewers passed 5,000. The comments are flying at the speed of a machine gun. "Tesha, stop this right now." Rick took a step toward her. "Or what?" Tesha stood up from the couch without stopping the broadcast. "Are you threatening me? In front of witnesses?" "I'm not threatening, I'm just what? Just cheating on me for a month? Just lying to me every day?" Rick tried to turn off the camera, but Tesha blocked it. "Don't you dare! This is my air!" You're out of your mind. Turn off the damn camera. No, let everyone see what you're really like. Rick grabbed her arm sharply, trying to pull her away from the camera. Tesha lashed out, and they began to struggle. The number of spectators reached 7,000 people. "Let go of me!" Tesha screamed. "Turn off the camera and I'll let go!" At that moment, something inside Tesha broke. All the resentment, humiliation, lies that had accumulated over the months poured out into an uncontrollable rage. She shoved Rick away and walked quickly into the kitchen. He followed her. "Tesha, calm down. Yes, we'll talk about it, but not in front of the entire internet." "Talk?" Tesha turned around to him. "Talk about what? About you taking your young girlfriend to restaurants while I'm at home playing the role of the perfect wife to my subscribers? It's not what you think." "It's not? Then what is it? Business meetings? Mentoring?" Rick tried to move closer to her, but Tesha retreated to the kitchen table where the knives lay. The camera in the living room continued to film, though they were no longer in the frame. The sound was transmitted clearly. "Tesha, listen." "No, you listen." She grabbed a big kitchen knife. 10 years! 10 years I've been the perfect wife for you." "Put the knife down, Tesha, please." "What did you do? You think you deserve to have some fun on the side?" Rick took another step toward her. "Don't come any closer." But he kept walking, holding out his arms, trying to calm her down. At that moment, Tesha completely lost control. All the emotions she'd been suppressing for months came rushing out in one move. The knife entered Rick's chest up to the hilt. He stopped, looked at her in surprise, then at the blood that was beginning to spread across his white shirt. "Tesh!" He wheezed and collapsed to the floor. Tesha stood over him, still clutching the knife, unable to believe what had just happened. In the living room, the camera continued filming, and chaos was going on in the comments. 8,000 viewers witnessed the murder. Valerie Hayes arrived on Maple Avenue at 8 p.m., 30 minutes after the sun had already disappeared over the horizon and the streetlights were beginning to break up the thickening twilight. 3 patrol cars, an ambulance, and a forensics van were parked in front of the 412 house. Neighbors gathered at a safe distance, whispering and pointing to the windows of the second-floor apartment. Detective Derek Clark was already waiting for her at the entrance. A tall man with neatly trimmed hair and attentive eyes, he was 5 years younger than Valerie, but they'd been working as a couple for 4 years. Derek had a knack for finding common ground with people where Valerie's directness could hinder an investigation. "What do we got?" Valerie asked, pulling a file out of the car. "A murder with very strange circumstances," Derek answered, leading her toward the driveway. Rick Williams, 36, IT security consultant, murdered by his wife, Tesha, stabbed in the chest. But best of all, it was all happening live on TikTok. Valerie paused. Live? Yes. Over 8,000 people watched the murder in real time. The 911 calls started coming in right after it happened. They went up to the second floor. Forensics were working in the hallway, taking pictures and collecting evidence. The apartment door was open, and police voices could be heard inside. "Where's the wife?" Valerie asked. "In the bedroom, under Officer Rodriguez's care. She's in shock, barely speaking. We've been waiting for you to start the formal questioning." Valerie went into the apartment. The spacious living room was tastefully furnished. Expensive furniture, a large television, bookshelves. On the coffee table was a tripod with a professional camera pointed at the couch. Some printouts were lying nearby. "Is this the shooting location?" she asked. "Yes." The broadcast started at 7:30. At first, everything went normally, the usual chatter about weekend plans. Then her husband came in and there was a confrontation. Derek showed her a folder of printed photos. She'd prepared proof of her husband's infidelity, restaurant receipts, pictures of his mistress from social media. Apparently, she planned to publicly expose him. Valerie studied the documents. Everything was meticulously prepared. Dates, places, circumstances. Tesha Williams was clearly conducting her own investigation into her husband's infidelity. "Where's the body?" In the kitchen. Forensics have already taken photos, but they haven't cleaned it up yet. They went into the kitchen. Rick Williams was lying on the floor in a pool of blood. The knife was sticking out of his chest just left of center, a clean shot to the heart. The man was dressed in a business suit, briefcase standing by the front door. Looks like he just got home from work, Derek noted. Neighbors said they heard screaming for about 10 minutes, then silence. Valerie looked around the crime scene. There were several other knives on the kitchen table, so Tesha must have grabbed the first one she saw. There were minimal signs of a struggle, an overturned chair, papers scattered on the floor. Do we have footage of the whole incident? Yeah, Tech already downloaded the video. The quality's good, the sound's clear, it's all recorded. You can show it later. Now let's go talk to the wife. They went into the bedroom. Tesha Williams sat on the edge of the bed, staring at one point. The woman looked much older than her 36 years, her face gaunt, her eyes red with tears, her hands shaking. There were bloodstains on her blouse. Mrs. Williams? Valerie called her gently. I'm Detective Hayes. This is my partner, Detective Clark. We need to talk to you. Tesha slowly raised her head. Is he dead? She asked quietly. Yes, ma'am. Your husband is dead. Do you understand what happened? Tesha nodded, but did not answer. Mrs. Williams, you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. Valerie read her rights to her, but Tesha listened absent-mindedly. I didn't mean to kill him, she finally said. I just wanted everyone to know the truth. I wanted him to stop lying. Tell us what happened tonight. Tesha began to speak slowly, rambling. Valerie and Derek listened, occasionally asking clarifying questions. The story went like this. Tesha discovered her husband's infidelity a few days ago, gathered evidence, decided to expose him publicly. She had planned only to cause a scandal, but when Rick tried to stop the broadcast, she lost control. He grabbed my arm, Tesha said, rubbing her wrist. I freaked out. I ran to the kitchen and he followed me. I grabbed the knife to keep him away. And then, I don't remember exactly. It all happened very quickly. Did you threaten your husband with the knife? I told him to stay away, but he wouldn't listen. So you stabbed him? Tesha cried. I didn't mean to. It just happened on its own. Valerie exchanged glances with Derek. The version sounded plausible, a crime of passion, but with elements of premeditation. Tesha was clearly planning a confrontation, though perhaps she didn't intend to kill. Mrs. Williams, we'll need to take you back to the station for a more detailed interview, and you should contact a lawyer. I understand, Tesha replied quietly. As she was being taken away, Valerie and Derek stayed at the scene, examining the evidence and talking to neighbors. It turned out that the Williams family was considered exemplary, quiet, polite, no scandals. Tesha was a popular blogger about family happiness. Ironic, Derek remarked, promoting the perfect marriage and her husband cheated. Now we need to find a mistress, Valerie said. Kira Jackson. Let's see what she can tell us. The next morning, they went to the IT company where Rick Williams worked. The office was housed in a modern building in downtown Riverside. The employees didn't yet know about the death of their colleague. The news was spreading slowly. The head of the company, upon learning of the incident, was shocked. Rick was one of our best people, he told the detectives. A professional of the highest caliber. He never had any problems at work. And what can you tell us about Kira Jackson? Kira? Good programmer, up-and-coming employee. Why, were they dating? That's what we're looking into. Where can we talk to her? Kira was found at a desk in the open center. The young woman was concentrating on the code on the monitor, unaware that her world was about to fall apart. When Valerie and Derek introduced themselves, Kira's face changed. Did something happen to Rick? She asked immediately. It was an eloquent question. Usually people asked what was wrong, why the police had come. Kira immediately thought of Rick. Ms. Jackson, can we talk to you in a more private setting? They walked to the meeting room. Valerie informed Kira of Rick's death without going into details. The girl turned pale, clutching her desk. How did it happen? That's what we're looking into. We know that you and Mr. Williams had a close relationship. Kira froze for a moment, then cried. He was married, she said through her tears. Yes, he was. Tell us about your relationship. The story Kira told was typical of office romances. Rick helped her with her projects, they started staying late after work, and gradually grew closer. A month ago, the relationship became intimate. He said the marriage was long dead, Kira said. That he and his wife lived like neighbors, that he was planning a divorce. Did he promise to marry you? Not directly, but, yes, he hinted at it. We were even planning to go on vacation together. When? Next weekend. Rick told his wife he was going to corporate training. Valerie was taking notes. The picture was becoming clearer. Rick was leading a double life, deceiving both women. His wife about fidelity, his mistress about the seriousness of the relationship. Ms. Jackson, did Rick's wife know about your relationship? I don't think so. We were very discreet. Rick never mentioned that his wife suspected anything? Kira wondered. He'd seemed a little jumpy in the last week. Said Tesha was asking weird questions about work, but I thought it was just paranoia. Did you ever meet Rick's wife? Once at a corporate event 3 months ago. She seemed like a nice woman, very pretty, outgoing. Valerie finished her interview and went back to the station with Derek. We had to study the videotape of the murder and prepare a case for the DA's office. What do you think? Derek asked on the way out. Classic triangle, Valerie replied. Unfaithful husband, deceitful wife, naive mistress. Only the ending was bloody. Did Tesha plan the murder? I doubt it. She was preparing for public exposure, but the murder was probably spontaneous. Although the DA can try to prove premeditation. Back at the station, they reviewed the tape of the broadcast. The video was very clear indeed. At first, Tesha acted like a normal blogger, smiling, chatting with her subscribers. Then Rick appeared, and the atmosphere changed dramatically. Valerie scrutinized the body language of the participants. Tesha was tense, but in control of herself. Rick didn't understand what was going on at first, then became concerned. When the open confrontation began, both lost their composure. A soundtrack captured their conversation in the kitchen. Tesha had actually warned her husband to stay away. Rick tried to calm her down, but kept walking toward her. At one point, his voice became sharper, almost threatening. Interesting, Valerie remarked. He wasn't just trying to calm his wife down. It sounded like he was angry too. Yeah, he raised his voice at the end. Maybe he tried to use force? Valerie rewound the tape several times, listening to the intonations. Rick had definitely gotten more aggressive when he realized that Tesha wasn't going to stop airing. He might have actually tried to take her phone or camera away from her by force. That could play in Tesha's favor, she said. If her lawyer proves she was defending herself against physical coercion. But we have evidence of prior preparation. She gathered dirt on her husband, picked a time for him to come home during the broadcast. Yeah, that complicates matters. It's not a simple murder of passion or first-degree cold-blooded murder, something in between. Valerie closed the laptop with the recording. They had enough evidence to charge Tesha Williams. All that remained was to file the paperwork and turn the case over to the prosecutor. But something about the story continued to bother her. 2 days later, Valerie Hayes sat in the interview room across from Tesha Williams and her attorney, a young woman named Sarah Mitchell. Tesha had changed noticeably over the days. The shock had passed, and now she looked exhausted but more collected. The lawyer had time to study the case file and was preparing to build a defense based on involuntary manslaughter by passion. Mrs. Williams, Valerie began, we need to clarify a few things. You say you didn't plan to kill your husband, but we have evidence of serious preparations for a confrontation. Tesha nodded. Yes, I was preparing, but only for exposing him publicly, to show subscribers that our perfect marriage was a lie. Why live on air? Why not talk to my husband alone? Because he'd deny it, Tesha replied with bitterness in her voice. Rick was a persuasive man. He'd come up with an explanation for every check, every piece of evidence. And then he'd be even more careful. And you wanted to catch him off guard. That's right. So he couldn't lie in front of thousands of witnesses. Valerie studied Tesha's face, trying to see if she was telling the truth. Tell me again what happened in the kitchen. Rick was angry. Realizing his reputation was ruined, he tried to stop me by force. He grabbed my arms, tried to pull me away from the camera. I broke free and ran into the kitchen. Why did you take the knife? Tesha was silent for a few seconds. I was afraid. I had never seen Rick so angry. He was ready to use force, and I just wanted to protect myself. But you walked up to him with a knife in your hand. I told him to stay back. I warned him. Counselor intervened. Detective, my client was acting under extreme emotional stress. She had just discovered her husband's infidelity, confronted him with his violent behavior. I understand, Valerie interrupted her, but scheduling the broadcast to coincide with her husband's return from work suggests some premeditation. Not murder, Sarah Mitchell objected. Premeditation of a confrontation is not the same as planning a murder. Valerie nodded. The lawyer was right. The distinction between a planned scandal and a planned murder is significant from a legal point of view. Mrs. Williams, do you regret what happened? Tisha cried. Of course I regret it. I never wanted Rick to die. I just wanted him to stop lying, to admit what he was doing. How did you feel about Kira Jackson? Anger, resentment. But more for Rick. She's young, naive. He promised her a divorce, told her we didn't love each other. She believed it. Valerie finished her interrogation and walked out into the hallway. Derek was waiting for her with a cup of coffee. How'd it go? She's sticking to the self-defense theory. And you know what? I almost believe her. Almost? Tesha's a smart woman. She realized that publicly exposing her husband could cause him to react uncontrollably. Maybe she was subconsciously preparing for a physical confrontation. So the murder wasn't random, but it wasn't planned? Something like that. She created a situation that could end in violence, but she didn't specifically plan the murder. They returned to Valerie's office, where the case files were on the desk. Crime scene photos, printouts of witness statements, transcripts of interviews, screenshots from social media. You know what strikes me most about this story? Valerie said, leafing through the files. What's that? The way social media has distorted reality for everyone involved. Tesha spent years creating an image of the perfect family, even though the problems had existed for years. Rick had an affair, but continued to play the role of caring husband online. Kira posted hints of a secret affair, not realizing where it might lead. Derek nodded, and in the end, 8,000 people witnessed a murder. Tesha wanted publicity. She got it. Only now she was known not as a successful blogger, but as the woman who'd killed her husband on live TV. Valerie organized the documents into a folder. The case was ready to be handed over to the prosecutor. The charge would be serious, second-degree murder, but not first-degree murder. Tesha hadn't planned the murder in advance, but had created the conditions that led to it. What kind of sentence was she facing? Derek asked. 10 to 25 years, depending on what the jury decides. If the defense attorney can prove that Tesha acted out of passion, the sentence could be reduced. What about Kira? Nothing. Having an affair with a married man is not a crime. Although, of course, she's a public figure now too, not by choice. Valerie signed the last of the paperwork and put the folder aside. One more case closed, but the residue remained unpleasant. Modern technology allowed people to create virtual images that were radically different from reality. Tesha Williams built a career on the demonstration of family happiness, which in fact did not exist. When the illusion collapsed, The consequences were tragic. The next day, Valerie received a call from the prosecutor. Tom liked the quality of the investigation and was confident of a successful prosecution. Tesha Williams was charged with second-degree murder. Her attorney will seek a plea bargain with the prosecution, the prosecutor said. A plea agreement in exchange for a reduction in the charge to involuntary manslaughter. How do you feel about that? We'll consider the offer. We have good evidence, but the jury might sympathize with the cheating wife, especially after they see the tape of the broadcast. Valerie hung up the phone and leaned back in her chair. The Williams case will go down in criminology textbooks as an example of how social media influences criminal behavior. Tesha didn't just kill her husband, she did it publicly, turning a personal tragedy into a media event. A month later, Tesha's lawyer actually cut a deal with the prosecution. Tesha Williams pleaded guilty to involuntary manslaughter and received a sentence of 12 years in prison with the possibility of parole in 8 years. Given the circumstances of the case, it was a reasonable compromise. Kira Jackson left Riverside shortly after the trial. The media attention made her life unbearable. The last time Valerie had seen her picture on the news, the young woman was boarding an airplane, hiding her face from the cameras. And the tape of Rick Williams' murder is still circulating on the internet, despite all attempts to delete it. 8,000 witnesses turned into millions of views, and the family drama turned into viral content. Valerie sometimes thought about the case, especially when she heard about new crimes related to social media. People were increasingly eager to make their lives public without realizing the consequences. The line between reality and its online version was blurring, and the results were tragic.